Why would Phoebe Handsjuk, a 24-year-old woman in a luxury apartment in Melbourne, Australia, climb into a garbage chute 12 stories high?
After studying the gruesome deaths, the coroner called it death by misadventure.
But is that right? Did she do this willingly? If so, why? If not, what or who made her do it?
That's on this episode of So Much Crime,
So Little Time.
Before we jump into today's episode, don't forget that we're on Patreon. Patreon.com/so much crime, so little time. You will get bonus content there, longer cuts of our shows, unedited material, and some very interesting chats between Jeff and I about the true crime question of the week. You may also get a shout out on the show and access to some merch.
Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time. I'm Jeff.
And I'm Dee. And in this episode, we'll introduce you to Phoebe's Fall, a podcast from The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Yes, that's right, the same place we got The Last Voyage of the Pongsu from.
After that, we'll tackle a true crime question of the week. We're going to talk about the most reckless thing we've done in our lives.
We're nearly done. If you haven't listened to Phoebe's Fall, that's great.
We're just going to introduce you to the podcast and cover parts of the very first episode. We're not going to have any spoilers for what's to come.
You can find a link to Phoebe's Fall in our show notes.
In our next episode, we are going to discuss the whole series. But right now, we just want to decide if this is a crime that's worth your time. All right, this is a very serious crime we're going to be talking about today. So before we get to that heavy discussion, we want to do something a little bit lighter. This crime happened on December 2nd, 2010. So to help us place ourselves in that time, we're going to hop in the time machine. All right, Dee, December 2nd, 2010. Where in the world were you?
My birthday's around then, and what we used to do is watch the X Factor together. So all the finalists would have been chosen at that stage, and they got together to release a cover of a well-known song, and it went to number one for 3 weeks around this time. It went to number one in Ireland, the UK, and Scotland, I think. It was raising funds for the British Army, I think, which is interesting that it went to number one in Ireland. But
I think the Irish are known for supporting.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to flat read you some lyrics. I presume, well, I would have said I could bet money, although I'm not allowed to bet in this state, that you would have guessed this song. But remember last week you didn't get Killing Me Softly. So by the Fugees.
Yes.
So
never forget.
Who knows? Never gonna live that down. All right. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
I will be king, and you'll be queen. Though nothing will drive them away. We can beat them just for one day. We can be just for one day.
Heroes.
I did a word there.
David Bowie.
Yeah. Look at you. Is that your era more than the Fugees?
Wow, that song came out before I was born. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
You know what about that song, though? As a flat reading, though, as hard. Okay, part of why this is hard is the flat reading.
I tried to sound like a pirate.
Yeah. But that particular song has been covered. You know, they use it in like movie trailers where it's like someone doing it real slow or something.
Advert. Oh, yeah. You're so right.
Yeah.
They do. There's my flat read of David Bowie. Well done, well done.
I have too many things.
You love the time machine. I think you prefer the time machine to the true crime, Jeff.
It's possible. All right.
Go for it.
So first of all, the top song in the U.S. that week is a song that I don't want to read the lyrics to. And I read the lyrics. It's Rihanna, Only Girl in the World. Which I thought, oh, how bad could that song be? And then I read the lyrics like, oh, yeah, those aren't lyrics I want to read.
Keeping it clean.
All right. I have two taglines for a movie. There's only two taglines to this movie.
Okay.
First tagline. The dream is real.
Oh, Inception?
Yeah. Wow. That was good.
I saw that movie.
Okay. Yeah. Second tagline was your mind is...
I thought about that movie recently and I don't know why. But anyway, go on.
Did you dream about it?
Probably.
All right. Let's do another song. I'm going to address this one to you because it's a series of questions. So I'm adding in your name, but that's not part of the lyrics.
What? Nobody was serenading me in 2010.
Dee, do you ever feel like a plastic bag drifting through the wind, wanting to start again? Do you know it already?
Katy Perry.
Yeah. What's the name of the song?
Fireworks.
Wow, that was really good. All right, that
Yeah.
is our time machine.
Let's talk a bit about the podcast and the crime that this episode is about. So the podcast was released in 2016, so it's a pretty old one. Its hosts are Richard Baker, who we heard before in The Last Voyage of the Pongsu, and Michael. There's 6 main episodes, plus a handful of mini episodes and some updates. Most of the episodes are about 30 minutes long. The mini episodes are closer to 5-6 minutes.
Okay, so the story, and again, we're just talking about the first episode. The first episode is called Knowing Phoebe. Here we learn about basically how Phoebe died. So she fell 40 meters down a garbage chute in this luxury apartment building in Melbourne, Australia. The fall actually didn't kill her. She mostly severed her foot in the garbage chute, and she basically bled out on the floor in the dark. This was a pretty gruesome way to go, and it's described in a little bit of detail here. I'm guessing we're going to come back to this, which I'm not super looking forward to. But then most of the rest of the episode is just background on Phoebe, kind of who she was. So she was 24 when she died. We learn about her childhood, how we hear from her family, if we hear from her friends. She had started partying pretty heavily when she was fairly young, getting into drugs and alcohol since at least 13. We hear about her depression, although we kind of hear how that was nothing too uncommon for her peer group. I want to talk more about that. And we hear about her being into older men, which I'm presuming is going to come back later. That's pretty much it. So yeah, so Dee, let's jump in and talk about this. What initial thoughts? I guess we usually start with the hosts. We know one of these hosts already.
Yeah, we do. This podcast came out 3 years before The Last Voyage of the Pongsu. I don't feel like we got a huge amount from the hosts in episode 1. I felt like it was fine. I have no feelings towards either of the hosts right now.
Can I talk about one thing though? So I had written down how it's pretty much just one of those first episodes, and maybe it's the whole show's like this, where it's mostly just we're hearing from interview subjects. And then we got to one point in the episode.
I was going to ask you about this. I guarantee it's the same part.
Yeah, so the only time we really get anything beyond just sort of contextualizing from these hosts is when Richard Baker comes in and says, I don't think we should have included that part. After they just included a part.
Yeah, I have this noted, Jeff. Okay, so to give context before we start discussing this, it was a movie clip from apparently one of Phoebe's favorite movies. It's called The Vanishing.
Yeah, so The Vanishing is, I think, an art house movie. I actually went and watched the trailer for it, and it looks a little intense and a little bizarre. And
sounds it from the clip. We'll put the trailer in on our Patreon.
The clip that they play is about a guy basically jumping from a building, jumping from a high building down to a cobblestone street. And she seemed to be fascinated with kind of reckless things like this, which we'll come back to. But this was sort of emblematic of her interest in jumping, which maybe is a way of suggesting why she climbed in this garbage chute, although that seems like a stretch. Why are you making that face?
I have thoughts and feelings on this, and my feelings and thoughts are at opposing ends of this argument, which is hard.
Okay.
Because my feelings are, yes, that is true. We shouldn't be discussing that because she wants to climb a really cool trees or climb on top of a building doesn't necessarily mean that this shouldn't be brought into the case, or the coroner shouldn't be considering this when he's determining whether this is an accidental death or not. Or death by misadventure. To me, it brought up, which is, I know this is a mad jump, so I am aware, bear with me. It brings up some quite recent cases, and I think I've mentioned this before, in Ireland, of multiple men raping a woman. A big high profile case in Ireland a few years ago, and the woman's underwear was paraded around the court, basically saying, if she wore this underwear, is this the underwear of a woman who doesn't want it to be seen?
Oh.
Yeah. Not the first time it's happened that has been used as a tactic by defendants, but no thank you.
In this case, she was asking for it.
Yeah. Not okay. No thank you. And part of my feelings feel like this, and maybe, look, shout at me and tell me I'm wrong, but part of me feels like they're saying because she did X, she probably did Y. But in this case, I feel like they're very different things. Climbing up something you can see and jumping, the width of something you can see is very different to being like, I'm just going to throw myself down this thing. I feel like if the case is that Phoebe put herself in this chute, it seems to me, from what we've heard so far, she would have had to think about the fact that what's happening at the end of this. Like, this isn't just laundry. Like, this just isn't going into a pile of sheets at the end. This isn't sliding down the banisters of a really tall staircase and you're going to pop off at the end and do a dainty twirl. Like, that's not what this is. And as someone who has very little experience with a garbage chute, very little, you don't have that in Ireland, it feels like that's a big stretch. But then my thoughts go more, if someone's real adventurous could, her drug use, her alcohol use seemed to be, at one point someone said I think the phrase was that she'd lose her sea legs very easily.
Yeah, her father said that, I think, about her when she drinks. So
if I had to go with one, I'm going with my heart and my feelings here, that's bullshit and they can't consider that. But I have to think it's possible. I don't know. I have to whisper that because I feel bad even saying it.
This gets to something that is a question I had about this, or a frustration, I guess, I had about this show to start, is there's a lot of conjecture and there's a lot of people who seem to have very strong opinions about things that I just don't know how they know. And some of it...
How substantiated it is.
Yeah. This episode is about it's called Knowing Phoebe, right? It's about getting to know who this person was and kind of maybe get some clues into what led to this, her death. And the way she is portrayed does something that I feel like is a true crime trope that really bothers me, of making her into this magical person who is mysterious and beautiful and creative. And she's a karate prodigy. And she, like, you know, is a free spirit. And that kind of bugged me. What did you think of that?
This is 2016 that this podcast is coming out. And we have discussed so many times how pretty white women, but pretty white women get a lot of media attention, and not to dismiss the media attention that this is giving, but maybe it's creating like a mythical creature. This is perfection. But then really, actually, Jeff, do you know what? I've talked myself out of that because they're talking about her drug use from 13. Her parents seem to be totally open about that. Yeah, like she was into drinking drugs. She used to like go out on whoever's ID. She had a really wholesome relationship with her granny, who she spoke to about LSD use, which I'm not going to lie, I respect the granny. She's coming on there and she's been like, yeah, she's my confidant. I was like, you know what's real bad? LSD. We ain't good for LSD. I love that.
That's great. Yeah. But no, okay, yeah. So they're portraying her as someone who goes out at 13 with her friends to the clubs with a fake ID or whatever, and comes home but even there,
a handful of drugs.
Her friend basically said, I don't know how she did it. She just like disappeared with these guys and then came back with drugs. I know how she did it. She was a pretty 13-year-old who probably did whatever she would. What? What?
You're filling in the gaps there. Don't fill in those gaps. I will tell you what. I have seen friends of mine get a lot of things from men previously, especially when we were younger, without having to do a thing but bat their eyelids.
No, I'm. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying maybe all she had to do was flirt with these men.
That's not what you were saying. You were leading it somewhere that it was not. It should not be that.
Maybe.
You were.
Maybe.
You were.
But what does that do? Like, what does that implication do? It paints her more as this sort of beautiful, mysterious woman.
You know what, though? Maybe that's a bit of inbuilt. I know you're not a misogynist, but a slight inbuilt inability to see what it is there. She was gaining power over some men with what she had. And I feel like that's what her friends were saying. She walks into a room, she circles the room, like she looks around with her eyes and everyone is on her. And she is using her abilities. She's taking power.
Maybe.
Of the situation.
I feel like she's being fetishized a little throughout this episode, though.
Oh, yeah. I get what you're saying.
Because there's other things here, too, right? Like there's the McDonald's story where it's she gets a job at McDonald's. She's like 16. She works a shift. It goes fine. She works a second shift. She decides she doesn't want to be there anymore, but she can't quit without giving back her uniform. So she takes off her uniform and runs home in her underwear.
You're not going to like my response, though.
What's your response?
Okay, let me tell you a story in my response.
Okay.
A 13-year-old boy, very attractive, goes into a club and manages to get drinks and drugs off older women. A 13-year-old boy likes to climb stuff and jump from building to building. A 13-year-old boy or a 16-year-old boy gets a job in McDonald's and on his second day says, F this, don't want to work anymore. Fine, take my uniform, takes it off and runs home. Not a fetish. That is an inbuilt, I'm sorry.
What?
I think, I don't know, what do we even call it? I think if we weren't talking about Phoebe as a woman, if we were talking as a girl, because she was at that stage, if we were talking about Phoebe as a man, a teenage man, you wouldn't go there.
No, but I think that's part of the point, though. I think her as a person, gets reduced here. I don't think it's called knowing Phoebe. I don't feel like I really know who she was. Like, I feel like I know this sort of caricature of a person. And these glimmers we get, like even like what her father says, so her father is a psychologist and he has this weird surfing metaphor where he's basically saying she wasn't really that depressed. You just have to, like, if you get pulled down by the wave, you just tuck up, hold your breath, and you go back to the surface. And that was rough.
That was bad. That is like, I'm not going to you for therapy, buddy. Like,
right. If that's your advice, no. She maybe needed the medication, and maybe the fact that, so she's described as going on and off her antidepressant medication
by herself, like with no direction.
She might have needed a better support system than she was getting.
I mean, what I found interesting was there was no question of why she was going out at the age of 13.
Yeah.
Like, this is 2010. So I'm older. Well, Phoebe died when she was 23?
24.
Oh, okay. So I was the same age as her.
Yeah. Did that just bring it to a different place?
Yeah, it did. That did other stuff because I wasn't doing that at 13. But I do slightly agree with you, but I just think, I don't know. Did you not know this girl? When they were describing her, is there no one, a girl or a boy, like a person as you were growing up, did you not know this person who did this thing? Because there's at least one person in mind that I know this is them. And yeah. I know that they were constantly a teeny step away from ending it all. Not by choice. Well, I don't know if it was I witnessed or heard about on numerous occasions when they were one step away from making that one reckless decision too much and ending up in a bad place.
That's fair. All right. You're right. I did. I definitely knew people like that. I mean, I know people like that into their 30s even who... That's fair. I guess I didn't think about it that way.
There's a bit of luck, I think, that goes into that. If it was, in fact, a reckless decision. What I was alluding to previously with the case with the underwear being held up and saying, like, you know, does this look like the underwear of a woman who does not want their underwear to be seen? Well, she did this before. So does this not seem like something she would do again? Like, does it not seem like she would want to take it that step too far? Because someone can be reckless, but in their mind, they know it's too far.
Yeah. It's so hard, I think, to understand really what was going through her mind. Like we hear that when she died, her blood alcohol content was 0.16, which I looked up because I didn't have a perception of what that meant. And for me, at my weight, that would be 8 to 9 drinks in 1 hour.
In 1 hour?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what she weighed, so I don't know how much she was drinking. But like for me, and I'm probably heavier than her, but that's a lot of alcohol.
Oof,
and that's on top of she was on a prescription medication and possibly...
And she had just taken sleeping medication as well. So you don't know, like, could someone have dosed a drink with sleeping medication, thrown loads of alcohol back in her? You don't know.
Yeah. There's so much we don't know here. It's such...
There is... And that's why it does feel first episode-y, I think. 2 things. First of all, the boyfriend is briefly mentioned.
Yeah, Aunt Hampel.
But then, like, all we get is he's got real rich parents who are, like, in the know, who helped him get out of this shit.
Judges. They were both judges.
Yeah. Which I was like, oh, I don't love that, because it's insinuating that he had something to do with it.
Right. What do we know about her boyfriend? He's much older. He had judge parents who basically were like, you got to get exonerated of any liability, which they say,
Yeah.
the hosts tell us he was not a suspect. Presume that won't come back. Maybe it will.
Why, though? I feel like if it didn't come back, it would mean we would need more information about him. If we get no more information about him, I'll be pissed.
That's fair.
Because we need something. Like, why? Why did he get to say that?
Well,
Like, if it's a solid alibi that he's in a different state or a different territory, as we're in Australia, that's totally fine. But unless it's solid and he's got 13 alibis, I wanna know why we're not questioning him more.
Well, I do think it's curious they made such a point of focusing on her fixation with older men. They gave us 2 stories about that, her neighbor and her art teacher. And why is that relevant if they're not setting us up for more down that thread? Like, what does that have to do with anything?
Come here. Last thing I want to talk to you about. The intro, Jeff, is very gruesome.
Yes.
It made me unsure in what are we listening to? Like, what did I choose? Because I chose this one.
It was gruesome. And so if you're listening to us talk about this and you haven't listened, it's very briefly described, but it is a horrific scene that is probably one of the most gruesome things, one of the more gruesome things we've listened to.
How do you think her family felt about it, the podcast so far? Like, and how she was portrayed?
I don't know. I feel like we've listened to other stories, or I've listened to interviews with family members, some of whom want the attention because, particularly if it's an unsolved case or if there's still mystery around it, like they want to bring attention to it, they want to bring more people to know about it, or they want to just draw attention to crimes like these. They want to help other people from being, like, one of the things that we learned, the police presumed it was a suicide very early. No one got the CCTV footage. We hear that there was also blood and broken glass in the apartment, but
the worst part, though,
what?
They didn't check for vital signs straight away.
Oh, possibly she could have been saved.
We hear at one point someone saying, and we're not introduced to this person, I could have been standing there right beside her and she could have been alive. I'm not a police person. I am not a fighter person, firefighter. I'm not a paramedic. I would know you check for vital signs straight away, no?
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been in this situation, so I'm not judging, because who knows what you do. We were only joking with the Heimlich the other day. Who knows what you do in that situation? But seriously.
I don't know. I presume we're going to hear more about that, but that doesn't seem to make any sense. But we've also heard now several cases where the police seem to get to a conclusion very quickly. So separate from the vital signs thing, but just about presuming that they know what happened and not investigating further, or not taking the time to do a more thorough investigation, whether it's checking for vital signs or looking for other clues. That seems to happen a lot. And maybe these are just people doing their job, and some days they have rough days and they're distracted and they don't do a good job at their job. Some days I don't do a good job at my job. Like that's
what?
That's true. I know. It's hard to believe, but it is true. Anyway, how eager are you to keep listening?
I want to know what happened here. My hesitancy to say that I'm eager to keep listening is really down to that initial part where they were very gruesome. I felt that the narration was very scary movie in quotation mark.
That's the first thing I thought of.
Thing.
Yeah, I thought of horror movies, and I thought this is the type of horror movies I don't understand why people watch.
Yeah, not into it. But I don't know. I need to keep listening.
Okay.
But I feel like if I say I want to keep listening.
Do you not like what that says about you?
Yeah, I don't like what that says about me. I'm trying to shield people from judging me. Don't do it.
I am interested in continuing to keep listening, even though I think this, like I said, I think there are tropes here of things that I do not like about true crime. But one of the things that I've realized as we've talked about more and more of these stories is, and I know you make fun of me all the time for my English degrees.
Who, me?
Yes, you.
Whom, me? No, that's not even the right use.
I want to know, I want any resolution to the story. I want to see where this is going. There are a lot of questions that are raised, and I'm curious about what kind of answers we'll get to those questions. So I don't feel great about it.
Do you think we're going to get answers to the questions?
Oh, God, I hope so. It'd be real frustrating if we don't.
If I've brought a cold case to you Will you let me choose again?
Maybe not for a couple of weeks.
Okay, Jeff. True crime question of the week. We discussed this quite a bit, that Phoebe is described as kind of doing reckless things, like jumping from rooftop to rooftop, climbing things that look unclimbable. But I would love to know, what's the most reckless thing you've done that you're willing to share here? That last part's real important.
Yeah, so you asked this question and you gave me some time to think about it. And I remember when you brought it up, you seemed to immediately have an answer to it. And it made me think, based on what I know of you and your life, I'm not going to have anything that's going to compare to what...
Mine isn't that good, because mine is an almost. I
Okay.
will put that out there.
Okay.
But it's apt. It's an apt almost.
Okay. I know that this question of the week is not a competition, but you also know that everything is a competition to me.
And me.
Yeah. So I was really trying to rack my brain to think of what is the most, because as you know, I've also been on this planet for a while and had a lot of opportunities.
Okay. You choose the most reckless and the thing that's not going to make me fall asleep.
Well, I do have a bunch of stories of running and encountering wild animals. Probably the scariest was being on a trail in Tahoe and there being a bear. And I was out in the middle of nowhere on a trail that's just like a single track trail. And there was a bear in front of me and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I stopped in my tracks. And why this is reckless is because I knew I'd seen a bear there the day before when I was out for a walk. I knew there was a bear in those woods and it was a pretty big bear. And I still went out for a run. I didn't wear headphones, which was my way of saying like, oh, I'm going to be responsible and have my,
I
ears
hear
free.
they sing as they walk.
Sometimes.
They're like,
sometimes.
I'm coming, get out of my way. Is that
Sometimes
what
they're
they do?
looking for picnic baskets. I don't know. Anyway, so going out into the woods where I knew there was a bear and going for a run, and then of course encountering that bear. I'm not going to drag the story out.
That is pretty reckless. Mine is apt because it was in Australia. It wasn't in Melbourne, but I didn't mention that St Kilda, where Phoebe was living, that's where all the Irish go. So like in Sydney, all the Irish go to Bondi or Coogee Beach. And in Melbourne, apparently all the Irish go to St Kilda. So where we were living was on a hill and it was real steep, like steep hill. We're talking maybe San Francisco style hills.
Okay.
I
pretty
would
steep.
say.
Yeah, probably.
Anyway, we're coming home. So Paul and I went over there together. One of his best mates actually still lives there. So we're coming home from a night out. So we've been drinking, and we find a trolley or like a shopping cart at the top of this hill. And I say, like, so we're all fairly well on, and I say, which is very unlike me because I'm not very reckless. I say to Paul, jump in, and I go to like get ready to push him down the hill in the trolley, and Paul's friend was like laughing until he realized it might actually happen, and he was like, oh no, like this is a really, really bad idea. And to this day it's the thing I look back on, I'm like, Jesus.
Wow. Yeah, that's a good story. I like that.
Yeah. Anyway, there you go.
On our next episode, we'll discuss all of Phoebe's fall.
What really happened to Phoebe?
And will there be closure for her family?
That's on the next So Much Crime.
So Little Time.
So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of MimeGov Media. The executive producer is Paxton Calariso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show in your podcast app. Don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.